Welcome to the Imagineering Education Podcast. This is Thomas Riddle. Thanks for joining us for conversations held at the crossroads of education and design, with a healthy dose of inspiration from Disney's Imagineers. Each week, we feature pertinent commentary on relevant issues and informative interviews with leaders and practitioners from the fields of education, design, entertainment, and more. On this episode, we'll be exploring topics related to leadership and how effective leaders can create legacies that last. Today's guest, Jeff Jenkins, is the principal of Ralph Chandler Middle School in Simpsonville, South Carolina. Jeff is a veteran educator with a passion for bringing innovative ideas into schools and experience in connecting the community to classrooms. He's also the president-elect of the South Carolina Association of Middle-Level Educators. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Thomas.
What you guys probably need to know, too, is that Jeff and I go back a few years to the days that he was a social studies teacher at, I guess it was Riverside Middle School.
That's right.
Yeah, I still remember. I was the social studies curriculum consultant for Greenville County Schools, and I remember his early years of teaching and going over and observing him in his classroom. And I walked away thinking, wow, that's an energetic guy. He's a great teacher and just full of energy and ideas.
That's right. That's the adult ADD coming.
So I know a little bit about your story, but our guests do not. And, you know, stories are something we talk about a lot on this podcast. So tell us your story. What's your story? How'd you get into education?
You know, I think a lot of folks can kind of fall on two ways where their story was filled with a lot of inspiration from, you know, highly effective educators that they really ingrained a sense of wanting to be like them and to come back and give back in the ways that they were poured into. And unfortunately, some have stories that are really ones that are driven by kind of what not to do. You know, I was born in 1980, and you know, through my time coming through school, there was a lot of learning that was still going on about how to work with students that had, you know, ADD or ADHD. I consequently was never diagnosed with that, but I'm pretty convinced, you know, that was something that I dealt with. So just a lot of energy, maturity issues, birthday in August, and so, you know, a lot of things kind of stack the deck towards having a difficult educational experience through primary schools and into middle school. I know that some of my middle school teachers that you know, might find their way to this podcast might go, "Oh my gosh, that guy's a principal." You know, so it took me some time. I was very much a late bloomer, and you know, as I started to kind of find myself in high school, you know, that's where I finally started to connect with some educators that saw who I was, believed in me, and being able to see both sides of that coin, I think, really is what drove me to, there's a way to do this for students like me and to do it well and do it right. And that really is kind of what drove me towards wanting to be an educator. I was always drawn to being helpful and you know, wanting to share what I've learned, my wisdom. I ran for the high school cross-country team and always gravitated towards the young runners, trying to foster them and bring them along. And so I think those kinds of dispositions were in there. And, you know, late high school is when that kind of really unlocked and set me on a course towards becoming an educator.
That's cool. So what did you, so why social studies?
For me, it was always more than the curriculum. Content really never factored too much into my way of thinking. It was about wanting to connect with students, make a difference in their lives, and, you know, in that you know, 18, 19-year-old version of myself, I saw the way to do that through social studies, the reasons people made decisions, you know, politically. How did we end up in a war? The leaders that we study and you know, the lessons we can learn from that. There was these life lessons kind of ready-made and baked into what we were going to be teaching anyway. And I always saw that as a way for me to pivot from the content into making a difference in lives. I didn't see a way to do that in math. Later I've come to learn there's absolutely ways to do that in all contents, but in that young version of myself, that was my way of feeling like I could take the vehicle that I was given, the keys to the car I was given, and then be able to do more than just the content.
So it's interesting to hear you say that. So many teachers get into, well, there's really a few reasons that people get into teaching. One is that they love the content, and so they want to share it with others. And a second reason is that they want to make a difference. Right. And it's not so much about the content as it is they're caring about trying to help kids. And it sounds like that's what your impetus was for social studies, or actually for teaching in general. All right, so how many years were you in the classroom as a teacher?
I think I was in there for 8 years.
Okay. And then decided to go to administration.
And then decided to pursue administration.
Why that choice? There's a lot of teachers that just want to be in the classroom. That's all they want to do is teach. And then there you have the ones that decide, hey, I want to go into administration. You have some that want to go in, like my niece. She got into teaching so she could one day be a principal. That's been her goal, career goal forever. So what was your story about that?
Speaking of a design process, I think my whole journey has always been more iterative. I never, looked at the organizational chart and said, that's the position I want. What are the moves I need to make to kind of get there? It just kind of happened. I wanted to be a teacher, and my horizon wasn't anything besides that. And then as I started doing it, finding some success in the classroom, there was a point in time, I think, when leadership at the building I was in saw a little something in me and asked me to be a team lead. And that's really kind of what started that whole process. I was serving as a team lead. Now I'm involved in conversations with, school leadership, and we're trying to make decisions, and, big and small, as we're looking at new programs or looking at, recognitions and things that we wanted to do as a school. I started getting kind of wrapped into those conversations, which began to open this door. And again, I ran into situations throughout my career, throughout my life, really has been chock full of poor examples and quality examples. And there was a little bit of that mixed in there, where I kind of was thinking, the things that I'm frustrated about as a teacher, that my colleagues were frustrated about, that they're looking at me and saying, well, what happened in that meeting? That's not, those conversations were happening. Positive ones absolutely were happening as well. But that's the part that kind of started getting me into this headspace of, I feel like I could do the job well, and that I maybe have something to offer in terms of taking the successes of my own classroom and having that influence to broaden those, those moves that I was making in the classroom into a broader, field of focus.
Right.
And that, again, that's kind of what led me to, all right, well, let me jump into a master's program, for leadership and see how this goes. And, again, one thing leads to the next. You're in these conversations that now you and I are having, and, similar conversations were happening through the program, and you start to kind of formulate, your attitudes and beliefs. And, it led me to a place where I felt like I could confidently walk into an administrative position and be able to do it in a way that I felt was the right way to do it, through those collective experiences of seeing, examples of what not to do because of the impact that those decisions, had on people in the building, students, teachers, etc. And being able to have some good examples too, to see like, okay, this is what's possible. Like this is the vision. This is what you can do. And that got me excited, being able to say, okay, we need more leaders that are quality leaders, because I've seen what poor leadership does, and being able to be part of that inspiration of, oh, so that's how you can dream. Right. And it really gave me kind of that lift to say, all right, go pursue this and see where it leads you to.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you remember well your experiences as a student. You remember well your experiences as a teacher. And are you then applying those experiences as a student and as a teacher in your current role as the leader of a school? And if you are doing that, what role do those experiences play in your everyday?
I think they play a very significant role. And, to the extent that I'm applying all of that into what I'm doing now, one of the very influential, books that, had an impact on my, what I aim for in leadership was the classic Good to Great, Jim Collins book. And I can remember one of the stories in there. I can't remember the name of the particular individual they were looking at, but they were in this conversation about the level 5 leadership piece. And one of the leaders is kind of quoted in there as saying his disposition was every day working to be qualified for the job. And so I try to be highly reflective at the end of a year, at the end of a moment, something's not quite going well, to try to always learn and figure out how best to go about, moving the needle forward. Beyond just kind of those kind of more soft skills, I would say, there are some really intentional things that I do. We're in a podcast talking about telling stories. I can remember working in a school environment where it felt like the principal always wanted to kind of hold things in the black box. Like they needed to be the smart person in the room. They needed to be the keeper of the knowledge. And so, we talk about that in my building with my assistant principals, with my teacher leadership team, that how detrimental that is. It doesn't foster growth in people that are in your building. It stifled the collective wisdom, of the people in the building. And frankly, as an assistant principal, I can remember feeling worried. I remember having a conversation with an assistant principal colleague of mine one time saying, we don't know what's going on in this building. And if something happened to leadership and district leadership comes down and says, okay, gang, where are we going? I'm not sure I could have answered that question. And it made me feel vulnerable as even a assistant principal leader, and so we talk about that with my leadership team, that sometimes, we'll get into conversations and I kind of look at them and say, I'm not sure if you guys are really interested in all this or not, but, I share that story with them. I don't want you to feel like you don't know where this building's going. And again, going back to that text, when one of the downfalls of organizations was when charismatic leaders left the building, not to suggest that I'm a charismatic leader, but that archetype of a leader
right.
leaves, everything goes with them,
right.
and the organization falls apart. And so those are things that we talk about like explicitly in the building as one example of how I try to take some of those poor examples and not repeat them.
Right. When I was getting my leadership degree at Furman with Dr. Harris Heath, who I consider my educational godfather, just amazing leader, amazing man, amazing person. He used to talk about that, that leaders, the best leaders, really work themselves out of a job, where your goal as a leader is to prepare people so well, train people so well, that if you leave the organization, it can continue to run as if you were still there. And so you're right. That is kind of the downfall, I think, of that charismatic leader that you're talking about, the one that is fantastic, but can often hold everything up on their own shoulders. They prop up the organization. They prop up the school. They prop up the business. And once they go, there's a vacuum, and it's difficult for the organization to carry on successfully. And I think that's one thing, looking at Walt Disney as an example. He really propped up an organization. He was a charismatic leader, but I think he really did a good job of preparing those around him, encouraging those around him, the talents of those around him to thrive. Sometimes, it depends on who you talk to in the Disney world that was there during Walt's day. Some folks say, he was very much the one that kept everything in the black box. Let's look at Epcot for a second. That is an example of a grand dream that Walt had. And I wonder, as many do, if he would have lived if that would have come to pass. He carried that project on his shoulders. When he died, of course, we have Epcot, but it is nothing like his grand vision of an actual working community. So there is that danger you're talking about. If you have a charismatic leader, the organization runs incredibly well. But if there's not leadership waiting in the wings to carry the torch, so to speak,
it's capacity building, right?
It is. It's completely capacity building, and I think that's so critically important. Let me ask you about this with leadership. In your opinion, is the administrator the only leader in the building?
I mean, absolutely not, right? Which is, I think, kind of the whole point of this current conversation.
Yep.
No, and we talk about that in our building again. I try to be explicit about those belief statements and the vision and the desire. I mean, we've talked about that with the teacher leadership team before. A lot of times that conversation is manifest in talking about building culture. And I often tell the teacher staff, that I believe, building leader has I shouldn't say soul power, but one of the specific powers that a school principal has is in very short order to destroy a building's culture.
Mm-hmm.
Could do it pretty quickly. And yet to build a positive culture single-handedly is pretty difficult to do as well. And so when we talk about, leadership in our building, there's very overt ways and very subtle ways that we highlight that and celebrate that. One of them is talking about building culture explicitly with the leadership team. I always tell them, this isn't about you being, the principal's pet or any of those kinds of negative connotations, but it is about you guys helping me keep a temperature check on the building. And if something's not landing right, we've talked about it in here. I have to model that shared leadership with them and get their input, and I do. And so we've built that relationship inside that conversation where you guys were part of the discussion. You know what the intent was. If it didn't deliver, if I failed in some way to deliver the message in a way that resonated with the staff, I need to know that because I can't correct a corrosive force if I'm blind to it. Another of those things that we do specifically, is we celebrate the leadership of the teachers in the building. Right now, this summer, I've got 2 teachers working on curriculum writing and a third one about to get started, with the district. And that's a huge accomplishment. That's a huge nod to their professionalism, to the trust and value that others have in their capacity to design curriculum for the entire district, and so we celebrate that. We point that out, that this is some of the things that people are doing in our building to lead. When they present at conferences, we use our social media to celebrate them. And so there's a lot of things that we can do, but yeah, absolutely. The principal is not the leader in the building, the sole owner of that title for sure.
Yeah, I like the quote. Actually, I think Disney used it in one of the leadership institutes I went to through the Disney Institute. Leadership isn't based on the position you hold, but the actions you take.
That's right. Yeah, I like that.
Leadership isn't based on the position you hold, but the actions you take. And so that can be those who have a leadership role officially, associated with their title, or even students. Students, teachers, anyone can be a leader if they are cultivated in the right way to do so. One of the things that Walt Disney once said is, of all the things I've done, the most vital is coordinating those who work with me and aiming their efforts at a certain goal. So for leaders to accomplish this, it takes knowing the answers to 3 questions: who you are, what you stand for, and where you're going. So in other words, you must have clear values and a clear vision. So I've heard you talk about some of this a little bit, school culture and your values. So as a school leader, how do you guide the establishment of values, and how do you set a vision for the school that helps bring those values to life? Do you think it's more effective for the leader to set the vision alone, or do you think it's just as effective or more effective to have a collaborative creation of the vision?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely needs to be collaborative. I mean, when we're talking about, buy-in and beliefs, I mean, that we're talking about the heart. And difficult to come in and tell someone how they're supposed to make their heart feel, without them being invested in that. Our business is a relational business, right? Everything from goals and aspirations we have as an organization all the way down to, the interactions of the adults and the students and the families. So, certainly it's a collaborative effort, and we have had those conversations about who we are, what we want to be. We've approached it through just conversations and getting to learn each other and each other's stories. And we've had it through very, formalized processes, book studies and professional development roundtable kind of conversations about, where we're headed next. What are some of our, what does data tell us? So we get kind of wonky on looking, all those conversations, I think, lead us to a place where we say, this is who we are and what we want to be. And then we get back to that, being action oriented towards how do we then carry that out? What do we put in place to make that happen?
Listening to you talk here makes me think a little bit of Simon Sinek and the Golden Circle.
That's right.
Which is, for those who aren't familiar with that, I encourage you to look up that TED Talk. But Sinek talks about knowing your what, your how, and your why. He says that you can tell people what you do, you can tell people how you do it, and that's where most organizations spend their time. This is how we do it, this is what we do. Or this is what we do, and this is how we do it. But he said the most important thing to communicate is the why. Why do you do what you do? If you don't know your why, then what you do and how you do it doesn't really matter. And so he talks about the most successful companies, most successful organizations are those who are really grounded in their why. And I think it takes strong leaders, effective leaders, to have those conversations with the organization and ask those questions. What is our why? Why do we do this in this business? Why do we do this in this organization? Why do we teach? Why are we here?
That's right.
So how would you answer this question? What is the why of education? What is the why of your school? For instance, just your school as a microcosm, could be any school, but what is the why of education?
I think for us, it's about the relationship, which sounds like a very kind of, safe thing to say, in the world of education, but we mean that at a very deep level. We talk about that. There's specific things we do. And I think kind of part of that relationship is also about providing educational experiences for our students. That's I believe what we're in this business for, is to really build strong, positive relationships, make a difference in the life of a child and give them really high quality experiences while they're in our building. And from there, we're familiar with Simon's work a bit in the building. We've used some of his work, in sessions with teachers to get at, what are you doing this thing for? Heard a speaker at one time talk about, if you say that you care about those relationships, do you care enough to make change in what you do and how you do it, in order to make those relationships then that much stronger? If you believe in the kids, do you believe in your craft? To study and learn and to stay relevant and as things move and shake in education, which I think kind of ties into this design process again, right? It's going back and looping back to, once you put that prototype in place, how are we looping back? Are we staying current? Are we staying relevant for our students? Because Lord knows they're changing.
Right, right.
But I think that really kind of gets at that core piece for us is we want them to have high quality experiences in our classroom, and we want those relationships to be really strong. That's what we're in this thing for.
Wow, you just hit on what I've often told teachers, young teachers, and pre-service teachers in my classes at Furman about the 3 R's: rigor, relevance, relationship. Of course, we think of reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Right.
Right. But I tell them, no, the 3 R's of education are those 3 things. And I heard you hit on all 3 of those. That it starts with the relationship. Before any rigorous learning, any challenging learning can take place. Because if you really want to get them to a place where they're going to have to push through some struggle, some hardship, then they're going to do it more likely in an atmosphere where they feel like they're supported, they're loved, where they know that there's a strong relationship. So foundationally, I'm hearing you say that it's about relationship. And then beyond that, you can get into the more challenging, rigorous learning. But don't forget to keep it relevant.
Right.
Make it relevant, because that's the hook on which everything else can be hung in your teaching. And so, yeah, that's good.
Those educational experiences, that's what they're going to remember. Students are going to remember an experience.
That's right. That's right. You know, just to let you guys know, when Jeff became principal, I was honored for him to invite me to come in his, that's like the first week of school, or teachers were back.
That's right.
And to do a session on the design process and design thinking and how to inspire kids through kind of outside the box engagement. And what I saw there was you creating a vision for the school from day one, where you didn't want the experiences of the kids to be learning as normal.
That's right.
You wanted it to be something different, something that was engaging, something that was challenging, something that was relevant, and there was a heart behind it. It's so exciting for me to see that drive in you, that enthusiasm in you is carried over. So hearing you say those things about the why, I can trace that back to that week one of you being in that building.
Ready or not.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, we have a lot more to talk about, and I think that what we'll do is we'll wrap up today, and we'll come back and discuss some more next week. So I appreciate you joining us today, and next week we'll pick back up with our conversation about leaders and legacies. But thanks for being here today.
I appreciate it, Thomas. It's an honor.
Jeff, if anyone wanted to follow your work, what's the best way for them to do so?
Can connect with me on Twitter. My handle there is @JenkinsTiger. And professionally at Ralph Chandler Middle School in Greenville County, South Carolina. Happy to connect with folks professionally there and let folks inside the school and see what our awesome teachers are doing to innovate every day. And also can connect with me through our organization, South Carolina Association for Middle Level Education, statewide organization that supports middle level education in South Carolina, at scamle.org.
Well, I appreciate it again, Jeff, and look forward to having you back next week.
All right. Thanks, Thomas.
So thanks for listening to today's show. If you'd like to learn more about our work, including our workshops, webinars, speaking engagements, and more, visit our website at www.imagineeringedu.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Imagineering Ed, and Facebook at Imagineering Education. We hope you'll also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. And when you do, don't forget to leave a review. So until next time, remember that there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow just a day away. Be blessed, everyone.